and welcome to a Valentine's Day special episode on the Festival of Bharat. As you all know, we are committed to bringing you content that is dharmic in energy, spirit, and intent. We aim to keep the torch of Sanatan Dharma flying proud and high. Few are probably aware that Valentine's Day, a day that is traditionally associated with a day for celebrating love the world over, has been associated, in fact, appropriated from a pre-Christian pagan ritual called Lupercalia. Although the origins of this festival are slightly dark and dubious, today, Valentine's Day has become the day for celebrating romantic love. To mark this occasion, disregarding its somewhat troubled history, we have a very special guest with us, Aditi Banerjee Malakar. Aditi ji's first novel, The Curse of Gandhari, a successful bestseller, was published by Bloomsbury in September 2019. Her second novel on Shiva and Sati has been slated for publication later in this year, in 2022, also by Bloomsbury India. She's a practicing attorney at a Fortune 500 financial services company in the US and has also completed an executive MBA from the Columbia University. She earned a Juris Doctor from Yale Law and received a BA in International Relations, magna cum laude from Tufts University. She's a prolific writer and speaker about Hinduism and the Hindu-American experience. She's a member of the Indic Academy and the Indic Book Club, which sponsored a successful 6-city book tour for The Curse of Gandhari in the September of 2019 across India. She co-edited the book, Invading the Sacred, an analysis of Hinduism studies in America in collaboration with Sri Rajiv Malhotra ji, and has also authored several essays in various publications, such as the Columbia Documentary History of Religion in America since 1945, and Buddhists, Hindus, and Sikhs in America, A Short History, and so on. Her articles have also been published in Outlook India and many other publications. In her free time, she enjoys wandering in the Himalayas, cooking with the latest kitchen gadgets, hunting for that perfect cup of tea, and reading about history and world literature. So happy to have you here with us, Aditi ji. Welcome to the Festival of Bharat. So Aditi ji, I take it you're based out of New Jersey, you're in Princeton, and am I right?
That's right.
And could you tell us how is it over there? How are you guys? I mean, my first question is always about COVID and Corona and stuff of that nature, because it's good to know how things are. And I hope everyone in your family is doing well.
Yes, luckily everyone in my immediate family is safe, but I don't think there's anyone who has gone untouched by COVID in the US or in India or anywhere really. So for the past 2 years, we've actually been working from home. So I work in New Jersey. And then like one day in March 2020, we were told we'd have to go home because of this pandemic. We thought we'd be back in a few weeks, and then, you know, it's 2 years. It's 2 years later. It's been very interesting, you know, going through this experience. The other hard part has been my husband is in India, and so we had gotten married at the end of 2019. And then he was going to come here, but then with the lockdown and things like that, and there's just, you know, like the consulate wasn't open, so he wasn't able to come here. And then because of the shutdown, I wasn't able to go there. So that's been kind of a trial of separation. But I think it's also these times that teach us about gratitude. And so, you know, being grateful for what we do have, not taking for granted what we do have. Also taking that time. It's very interesting. I think a lot of people just, the isolation of being at home was just driving a lot of people crazy. And I think that also tells us how important sadhana is, how important yoga is, and this ability to be by oneself and not always be restless and seeking for the external world. So I think that's just highlighted how important our dharma and our practices and traditions are. So that's been interesting. But yes, we're hoping that and work-wise we'll be able to go back, you know, in a hybrid model sometime in the next few months, but we'll see.
That's pretty much how it is. I mean, these stories are so common around the world. People separated, families, parents, children, wives, husband, in your case, separated because of this crisis. So I guess I empathize with your situation. But like you rightly said, it is testing time for all of us, and this is where our training or background in our practices come into play, and that's where sadhana helps, like you rightly pointed out. So much strength to you and to your husband, and I do hope that that you will be reunited in the future. um, so right, I wanted to know that you're a practicing attorney, and you're also a writer of bestseller books. So it's a very challenging, dual role that you play. So I wanted to know, actually, let's start with how you started out on your journey, or a little bit actually further back. What is your background? Where do you come from? What kind of are you, I can tell from your accent that you're probably raised in America. So could you tell us a little bit about that, and how you, since you are fairly young, how did you manage not turning woke or liberal, as the word is loosely used these days? How did you manage not to turn into that?
Sure. So I was born and brought up in the US, in the suburbs of Chicago in the Midwest. And growing up, in the summer, my mother would take my brother and me to India for basically for most of the summer. So we spent time with our grandparents and in Kolkata, visiting relatives, and just through that experience, we soaked up a lot of Hindu culture and Indian culture. And then of course my father would come too, but because we had the summers free, we spent a lot of time there. So growing up, we spoke Bangla at home. And then so I'd be surrounded by, when we were in India, we would see sometimes the serials on TV, on the Mahabharata or the Ramayana. So there was a little bit of that in the environment, but I really wanted to know more. So I would see something in the serial, and like the character of Gandhari, for example, or Draupadi, and I'd want to learn more. But there was very little that was available for someone like me who was English speaking, couldn't read the scripts of the Indian languages. And then when I'd go to the library or I'd go to the bookstores, there was maybe like one shelf for Hinduism, and it was all filled by Western writers on Hinduism, just very derogatory works. So there'd be a book on like Ramayana, let's say, but the introduction would be like, oh, well, he never existed, and Hindus believe in this myth, and kind of ridiculing us. So that was frustrating. At the same time, going through school and things like that, it was being of Indian descent, there was like some teasing, some bullying, things like that. And so I really fell in love with reading. So I would read a lot of books. I'd go to the library and pick up, whether it was Charles Dickens or the Bronte sisters or whoever it was. And I loved those books, and they were kind of like an escape from the real world. But what I felt is that, this must not be it. So kind of like these books, like, reading books like Anne of Green Gables or Little Women or Little House on the Prairie, they're very nice, but then it didn't seem satisfying to me that there must be something more than this. And so with that, and then the time in India visiting temples, and then I started going to the Chinmaya mission on the weekends for like morning meditation. And so there was always a sense that there was something more, something greater, and that led me towards wanting to find spirituality, wanting to find Dharma. And then also the frustration of it being very difficult to access in the West as someone growing up in the US. And so this duality kind of really propelled me towards, one, having this thirst for Dharma and sadhana and Hinduism, and then two, like recognizing all of the problems that we face today in having exposure to like authentic Hinduism, especially, I won't even say in the Western context, because I think you're seeing it in India now too. So with this development of this kind of system. And then what I found is, when I started doing sadhana, when I started doing japa or puja, even in a very little way at that time, or practicing yoga, the benefits of that were so great. It was so empowering that when you have that, you don't need anything else. You don't need like a construct of being entitled to fundamental rights or things like that, because what you learn is that your responsibility for your own self, which is actually very freeing. And the true freedom is not the freedom to do X, Y, and Z, but it's the freedom from the need of X, Y, and Z. And this kind of mindset switch, which comes from sadhana and like our philosophical traditions, then when you're grounded in that, then all of this other things, which, I think wokeism, liberalism, they come from good, noble impulses, but it's just a misunderstanding of fundamentally how the world works, how human nature works, and the best way of solving for real problems that do exist. So when you look at the dharmic framework, it's an alternative framework that's not based on the same premises necessarily, but can give actually much greater benefits that are long-term, sustainable, and holistic, and that lead us towards moksha or liberation rather than getting more entrenched in samsara.
Right. You mentioned that there was some amount of teasing and while you were growing up, owing to the fact that, now I want to know, was it owing to the fact that you were dark-skinned, or as in most countries, I don't even think that they understand the differences between being Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. So was it because you were, you were perceived to be from Asia and therefore the other, or was it specifically because you were Hindu? And did you encounter, for want of a better word, racism because of your Hindu faith and the fact that you were so steadfast to it?
So there are two different parts of that. So, there wasn't that sophistication where people would be able to understand what Hindu is versus Indian. So like people confuse Hindi and Hindu all the time in the US, for example. So even at that time, I didn't recognize why it was that this was happening. But I noticed sometimes people would say, oh, you should speak Hindi or go back to where you come from, even though I never spoke Hindi like at all. I think a lot of that is just from being, brown skinned or Asian, or if you do well with your grades and things like that. So there's just kind of that targeted bullying of certain groups. The Hinduphobia, or the discrimination based on being Hindu, that actually, interestingly enough, came more from, I would say, the teachers. So most of my teachers were excellent. They were very good. But then I had, in high school, I had a teacher on ancient history who was teaching about Hinduism. This is one class out of the year, and he got like a lot of things wrong. And then when I raised my hand and said, no, it's not, like, that's not how we think of it, he said, well, I read 3 books on Hinduism, so I know what I'm talking about. And like, who are you to challenge that? And so it's a very, I think nowadays maybe that wouldn't fly, but that was his tone then. And of course, we're raised to be very deferential to our teachers and respectful. And so I didn't have the wherewithal of how to respond to him. But that's where I kind of encountered that. Or I had like another teacher who would bring in like newspaper clippings, and sometimes there'd be something about India, like one of these kind of Temple of Doom type of articles, like, oh, look, in India, like this happened, like a flight crashed and the villagers garlanded the pilot, so they must have been like worshiping, like this kind of like very basic misunderstanding of what our cultural practices are and things like that. And they would read it in front of the class and people would laugh along. Or I had, someone brought in like their lunch. So they were Korean, right? So let's say they brought in kimchi, and then the teacher would say, oh, that must really stink. So these kinds of things, which, they really make an impact. So they may seem small or micro, but they actually leave a very deep and lasting impact.
Yeah.
And even when I was going through it, I didn't really think anything of it. I didn't like go back home and say like, say to my parents, like, can you believe this happened to me in school? It was just, oh, this is the way it is. And so not even questioning that until later.
Interesting. Yeah, that's I was curious to know, because I mean I think every other family, I mean, I have cousins who lived or grown up in America too, so I often wondered about their experiences there, and how much of it had to do with their Hindu background and how much of it was to do with the color of the skin. But yeah, some of the things you say resonate. So my next question would be, but you've written a lot on, you basically write on subjects revolving around which are Hindu in theme. So have you faced any challenges with respect to, say, where it comes to readers, or finding acceptability, or let's say even finding a publisher? So what kind of challenges did you face, since you were dealing with something that is very niche?
Yes, it's interesting. So when I was publishing my latest work on Hindu love stories, so this one I'm actually self-publishing. I wanted to bring it out in a certain time frame, and I got the idea just a few months ago, so I didn't really have time to go the traditional publishing route. So I was looking on Amazon. You can do research on searched for terms and categories and things like that, and what are people searching for on Amazon, and what do they find? And actually, it was very interesting. So there's very few, or it's like searches on Hinduism or Hindu related matters. And when they are, like Donegal is still in a top spot and things like that. So seemingly there's a very small market, let's say in the West for this. In India, I think there's still some more interest. I think actually you see a lot of interest, especially in the Mahabharata and things like that. There is still that interest. But one of the things that I've learned through writing is we may write about something that is Hindu or Indian, or let's say it's about the Mahabharata. But ultimately it relates to something that is universal of the human condition of humanity. And I think our job as writers is to take something that may be very narrow or niche, but find what's the universal meaning behind it. So for example, when I wrote about Gandhari, I had written about her pregnancy and her very difficult pregnancy. And I was working with a writing coach in the US, and she's white, has no familiarity with India or Hinduism, but she told me how much that section of it resonated with her, and her, she had a difficult pregnancy, and then also this idea of giving birth to 100 sons. And so she didn't just dismiss it as like something made up. She said, well, just think about what it must be like to be like a mother to like 100 children, and they all need you in different ways. And so when I saw that, I realized that we often underestimate or undercut ourselves, because we think of what we're dealing with as having very narrow application. But in that sense, Dharma has universal application, and there are themes that I think really have much broader appeal. And I think our job is to find that. And part of it is having that confidence in ourselves. So I think others, when they're celebrating their cultures or their religious traditions, they very much have that passion that, yes, this should be shared with the world. Right. And I think we sometimes have a bit of an inferiority complex that, only this small segment will be interested in it, but we should have more of that confidence. I think in terms of finding acceptability, I think readers are actually very open. Like I was really happy to see when The Curse of Gandhari had come out. I had done like a book tour in India, and had met with university students, and just seeing the questions they had, their engagement, not with my book so much, but with the Mahabharata as a whole, and this intellectual curiosity, that's great to see. So I think there's a lot of openness there. It's sometimes when you come to the middlemen in terms of traditional publishers, they have to deal with things like, how do you refer to devas and devis? So, for example, capitalizing, if you use the word gods or deva or devi or things like that, those kinds of things. how they react to like overtly Hindu messaging and things like that. That's where a lot of the work and challenges are, I think.
So, because my next question is to do with the fact that although niche, this genre of of Hindu-based or Hindu-themed writing is kind of gaining popularity, and like you said, there is a market for it in India. I mean, Amish Tripathi is another leading author who's made a name for himself as far as the genre is concerned. I wanted to know specifically, what is your take on this genre of writing? I mean, there is so much of it out there. There are a lot of unknown writers too who are actually writing increasingly on the subject. So on the subject, and I mean choosing Hindu themes or Hindu characters or religious character, Hindu religious, for want of a better word, deities or so on and so forth, choosing them as their protagonists and then building their own half fictional, half based on what they know. What is your take on this entire exercise as a genre? Do you have? I mean, what are your comments?
I think it's a double-edged sword in the sense that it's neither good nor bad in and of itself, but it depends how it's done and in different contexts. So for example, in and of itself, taking let's say like a speculative take, right? So let's say that you have a character in the Mahabharata who has only 20 or 30 lines devoted to him or her in the epic. I think where a lot of this kind of literature comes from is this love or fascination for this character, and then because of the epic nature of the Mahabharata, actually it's interesting, in 20, 30 lines, Vedavasa is able to convey an entire personality and an entire character arc. Like you can just say any character's name and we immediately know what they are just based on what he has composed. But then we have, we live in a world where we read novels, where novels go through like the whole life story of a character and look at their psychology and things like that. So there is this natural impulse from there. And there's nothing inherently wrong with exploring that. I think within our tradition, the way that we have looked on these literary or artistic takes is that it should be in consonance with the ethos and the worldview and the vision of the original. And it should be something that either glorifies the divine. So there was actually something I learned from Professor Vishwa Adluri, which is when they were, the Mahabharata was being transmitted and he had these palm leaf manuscripts. And someone would have the duty of comparing manuscripts and then recording the version. So sometimes, let's say they would find a verse in one version that wasn't in another, and they would have to decide whether to include it or whether to exclude it. Now, they didn't do an analysis of historically, was this an interpolation or something like that. They would look at it and say, does this particular verse glorify Narayana? And if so, then it shouldn't be forgotten, it shouldn't be lost, and let's preserve that. So this is kind of this very expansive, holistic vision that we have. That works very well, I think, when you have people who are grounded in and familiar with the original text. So they can understand, oh, here is where some liberties were taken and here is where it's not. What you're finding nowadays is, you see this on like Quora and Reddit and Google all the time, that something showed up in the Star TV serial on the Mahabharata. And so now that must be true. Right. Whether it's depictions of Karna or other things. That's where it becomes dangerous, because we've become so alienated from our own textual heritage that these kinds of takes can end up being a substitution for the original. Right. That's not a good thing. However, if it can be a gateway to the original, so for example, last year I read a book on Circe by Madeline Miller. So it's a novel, it's a take on the character of Circe from Greek mythology. And she wrote it so well that after reading that, like, I wanted to read a lot more about Greek mythology. So I knew it's a novel. I knew it's based on her, kind of feminist take. I appreciated that, but then I wanted to go back into the original. So if you have literature that does that, then that can be a very good thing, or if it's just making it available to a wider audience. But that's where I think it's kind of this double-edged sword. And so as authors in that genre, I think we have to be very careful to be responsible, and always be cognizant of that. So even if we're going beyond what's there in the lines of the text, to not deviate from the underlying spirit or ethos.
Very true. I mean, like you rightly pointed out, it's okay for it to draw your interest about a particular character or a particular text, but to use it as your mother lode of information about that particular faith or belief system would be dangerous. So yeah. You co-authored another book called Invading the Sacred with Sri. I think there were a few other authors also on the same project. Am I right? Because I remember reading this, Sankrant Sanu, and I don't know if I'm mistaken here.
Yes, it was Krishna Ramaswamy and Antonio de Nicolas were the other co-editors. Yes. Oh, but then it included writings from Sankrant Sanu and several others.
Yes,
also,
yes.
Yes.
It was a phenomenal work, and actually, something that required a lot of time, and because there's so much information in that book about the kind of misrepresentation that has been going on in the Western, especially American academia, where Hinduism is concerned. So I think there were specific studies which were presented in the book, if I remember correctly. I read it a while ago. Would you care to share, for the benefit of our viewers, just some of your findings during the course of writing this book? Stuff that you probably already knew because courtesy the fact that you yourself grew up in America and part of the academic ecosystem. But for the sake of the viewers, what are some of the things that you would, some of the findings, some of the things that you learned while you were writing the book about just the kind and the extent of misrepresentation that goes on in Western academia where Indology, so-called Indology, is concerned?
Yes, I remember the first time I read the writings of Sri Rajiv Malhotra. So he was really kind of the driving force behind that book and a lot of that work. And I was in law school, and he was writing on Sulekha.com, which was a web portal in those days. And he had written a series of articles, which he called like Risa Leela, which was about the writings of Doniger and others. And what he was able to do was to systematize and present in a holistic way what was actually happening, what was the cause behind things that I'd experienced individually or anecdotally, but I didn't have like a superstructure to put that into. So I mentioned some of the things I experienced in high school. In college, that had gotten worse. So taking classes on Hinduism or Indian history, which were just taught with a very blatant Marxist, angle. And there were comments about the Ramayana being nothing but about like the Aryan invasion and the the destruction of tribals and things like that. But that wasn't even. It's one thing if you present the Ramayana like this is what it was. This is how Valmiki wrote it. This is how it's been interpreted and understood by Indians and Hindus. And then here's like an alternative take. That's one thing. But that was just presented as the dominant narrative. Like this is what it is. So there were things like that. I wanted to start a Hindu students association in my college, and like there was resistance to doing that. Just very, very things like that. But like to me, there was just like, okay, these are things I'm experiencing. And when I read what Rajivji had written, it was like, oh no, that's not what it is. Like there's this system, there's this academic system where you have people who maybe they start with this research because they do actually have an appreciation for something Hindu or India, something that draws them. But then something in them, flips and they distort or they misrepresent, or they just want to focus on the very like eroticized Freudian types of analyses because of their own whatever issues that they have. And then how this becomes a pattern because there's like a handful of professors doing it, but then they all support and cite each other. And then when they have like doctoral students, they want to, they're also filtering them based on their own biases and things like that. And so you just have this cabal basically of academics who control not only how Hinduism is being studied, researched, written about in academia, but then how that informs, popular understanding through like media depictions and things like that. Because if there's an article in the media, they're going to go to these experts. When you go to the bookstores, like I said, only their works are there in the bookshelves. And so how this is just dominating the discourse, and then that gets re-imported back to India. And he was explaining this in a very systematic way. So like producers of knowledge, distribution, and how we're consuming it. And I thought, wow, so it's not just me. Like it's not me. The problem is, the system. And many of us were kind of on this path of discovery, really spurred a lot by the work that he had done. And I think there was a period of years there was just like a groundswell of community, awakening, activism, responsiveness to this. I'm taking this to textbooks that were used in school, and all of that. And this book was meant to just capture that movement. So capture what these professors had written, what the response was, how it was going. What was eye-opening for me is just how pervasive this was, and how it all kind of went back to this very small coterie of people. And then it also taught me to just be much less naive about things. So, I think we have this as Indians a lot, where we tend to just expect the system to be fair, or, so a lot of times there's this indignation when things aren't working the way we imagine them to work. And I think we have to take the time to understand, how systems operate, like the politics of things, the economics of things, what's the agenda of the other party or the other person. Not everything should be taken at face value. So this kind of critical thinking. And that was very important. It's important as a Hindu, but it's just important as an adult, because you find this everywhere. And then it also, this need for us to take back control of the representation of Hinduism. So the sense of responsibility and the sense of duty that each and every one of us have. Those were some of the main things that I had gotten out of it. I know many people said that reading the book is a very tough read, because there are extended passages or just quoting from what the scholars have said, and it's just very painful to read.
Could you maybe give an example of some of these very absurd, even shocking and ludicrous things that these scholars have? Just an example of some of those things that they've written about, actually written and published as work.
So there's the Professor Paul Courtwright from Emory University had written an award-winning book, not just some small award. I'm forgetting right now. I think it was like best history of religion book or something like that, like from AAR or something like that, about Ganesha. And in that book, he has this take that he's like a Freudian. And so he says, Ganesha's trunk represents a limp phallus, and he had penis envy of his father Shiva, who was very, very vigorous and so that's how we're supposed to understand the trunk and so this kind of thing. And I would think, okay, so some professor wrote about that, like who cares? But actually there were museum exhibits on Ganesha which made a reference to this in somewhat sanitized language, but you have children, you have school children going to the museums and seeing these things. And that's what they take away from it. So there were things like that. There were things like
there was one, I think I remember, about Ramakrishna Paramhans.
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, on one hand it's ludicrous, on the other it's just so painful that you make these shocking claims. Could you talk about that?
Yes. So this was Jeffrey Kreifel. So it's about that Ramakrishna had homoerotic tendencies, and that his relationship with Swami Vivekananda was kind of colored by this. This is actually another thing I'd heard when I was in college. Yeah. So it's basically this idea that when Ramakrishna was experiencing his bhavas, that they were really, yeah, part of it may have been bhakti, but there was also this homoerotic aspect to it.
Yeah.
And so like the disciples and they were kind of engaged in this kind of thing. And so this kind of thing also represents when you have a complete lack of understanding or adhikara to understand certain things. So if you've never done sadhana, if you've never practiced bhakti, then you won't understand these things. If you don't understand these things, then just give the benefit of the doubt that those who've actually gone through the tradition, have experienced it, have been recognized within the tradition, know something that you don't know, and just leave it at that. But there's this arrogance that if I haven't experienced or if I don't understand it, then it must be everyone else is understanding it wrong. And so I'm going to tell them how it should be. And so it's really a reflection of the perversions of their own mind. And I don't mean that in like a prudish way about perversion. There's nothing wrong with like sex and sexuality, but bringing that here where it doesn't have any place, it's just very wrong, and it shows us their own lack of
I think that
advancement.
America has this deep-rooted homophobia, and I think that percolates into everything that they look at, everything that they talk about, especially when it is the other. You see, I mean, their popular culture is filled with homophobia. Their language, their the little phrases and their everything. The culture is so filled with, and it's so obvious to an outsider. And it's really sad and ironic that percolates into everything that they look at, especially when it's an outsider culture. So thanks for bringing light to, yeah, you were saying.
No, I just wanted to make one comment on that. It's very interesting because they'll lecture to the rest of the world about like, LGBTQ and things like that, but it's actually much more of this stereotyped and homophobic culture here. Whereas I think in Asia, so like even like in India, like no one would think if two men were just holding hands like out of friendship or whatever, that's fine. If you wear a pink shirt, you're not being like effeminate or something like these conceptions weren't even there. And then it's even outside India, like in Chinese dramas that have become very popular. There's a lot of what I call like cross-dressing, or there's a lot of what they call like boy love or things like that. It's not necessarily like overtly a homosexual relationship, but there's a lot more comfort with this kind of not being so fixed in notions of like what's male or female, or having these hang-ups. And rather than just lecturing the rest of the world, they should there should be some self-reflection and learning from the rest of the world.
Very, very true. So Dharma is very important in our culture, even in our pursuit of kama, right? Pleasure or desire. And it's, in fact, pursuit of kama has been sanctioned and encouraged in our culture. So keeping that in mind, in your book, which is the subject of of our discussion today, you speak of pravriti and nivriti and the need to harmonize the two. So could you explain what they mean in the context of the love stories in your book?
Yes. So at one place in the book, I describe pravriti and nivriti as being like two wings of a bird. So just to start with what the terms mean. So in a very general sense, nivriti means turning away from the external world. So you can think of it as the path of the renunciate. Pravriti means being in the world, but ideally not of the world. So the classical example that's given is a lotus that grows in the mud but is untouched by the mud. So you're in samsara, you're living through samsara, but you're not being touched by it. And the basic idea was that both of those paths are valid, both lead towards a moksha, both are part of dharma, but to have an integrated worldview, so where both are kind of accepted and harmonized. So what I mean by that is you have examples of there's one of the stories in the book is about the Tripura Rahasya. In the Tripura Rahasya, which is it's a magnum opus, it's a text on Advaita Vedanta. This extended story is given about Hemachuda and Hemaleka. They're a married couple. Hemachuda is a prince. He falls in love with Hemaleka, who's the daughter of an Apsara and a Gandharva. And he's very in love with her. He's completely besotted with her. But he notices that she's not always reciprocating to the same extent. So he says, why is it that you are not, enjoying like our honeymoon period? We just got married. Like, why am I so much more, into this than you are? And she says, well, what is enjoyment? If you enjoy something, if you right now you're enjoying my beauty and youth, but then one day that'll pass. Then what'll you do? You'll find another desire to replace this. And she's kind of teaching him about vairagya or dispassion. And this long period begins where she actually teaches him, she becomes his guru, and she enlightens him. It's not that they stay married, but now they're in enlightened, and the entire kingdom actually becomes enlightened by her and by them. So that's, again, this example that even when you're in samsara, even when you're married, you should always have this cognition that kama, when it's pursued, so in our four purushartha, which are the aims of human life, it's dharma, artha, kama, moksha, but dharma always comes first. And that means even when you're pursuing artha or wealth or kama, or which is kind of enjoyment, it's always in accordance with dharma. And so some of these stories are reminders of that. Then on the other hand, you have the story of Agastya and Lopamudra. So this comes to us from the Rig Veda, and then it comes again in the Mahabharata. And in that, Agastya Muni, he's a rishi, he's a renowned rishi, and he marries Lopamudra. And there's a very interesting story behind that. And then Lopamudra feels, he's so focused on his austerities and his penance that she feels a little bit that you shouldn't forget about me. So then and she does this not in like a complaining way or something like that, but in this kind of very beautiful way. And she says, like husbands should also come to their wives. And in the Mahabharata, actually there's a scene when Agastya Muni sees her after her bath, and he says, yes, it's time for us to be together. And then she says, no, but I want it to be beautiful. The bed should be decked with flowers. There should be some romantic aspects to it. And he agrees with that. And in the Rig Veda, it actually ends with an acknowledgement or this appreciation of him. He was able to focus both on his austerities and also his relationship with his wife. So in many different ways, you find it's not black and white, but this harmony and this kind of worldview that's similar in both pravriti and nivritti, even though they're applied or lived out in different ways. So in your, there's the saying by Guru Rinpoche Padmasambhava from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and he's revered as the second Buddha, and he says, in action, and I'm going to just paraphrase, but in action I'm as meticulous as the grains of sand, but my realization is as broad as the sky, meaning in our actions we should be very particular and meticulous, but have a very broad worldview and vision of things. And I think that's what these stories in our texts really try to push us toward.
Such a beautiful thing to remember, right? I mean, that's how I think one should ideally live one's life, and totally encapsulates, yeah. So now your book, which is actually what we're here to talk about, Hindu love stories, right? And when is it slated to be released? Is it?
It's been released as an ebook on Kindle.
Ebook. Okay.
So in Amazon worldwide, it's available as an ebook, and then the paperback version it's been released in the US, but it'll be out in the India very shortly.
Very shortly. Okay, so we can get it on Kindle and
yes, it's on Amazon. Yes.
Okay. So and I'm very happy that we're talking about this on this occasion of Valentine's Day. I didn't want to get into the history of this particular day. I mean, it's we all know that it's an appropriated festival. So anyhow, I mean, since it is the day of love and all that, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about your book today. So your book, you said dharmically ever after. The word dharmic is very, very important when you talk about Hindu love stories, because the idea of dharma, like you just pointed out, is very, very important, even in the pursuit of love. So keeping that in mind, what were your learnings as you embarked on this journey, as you were writing this book? So, I mean, as a woman who's just gotten married, as a woman in love, did it reinforce some of the things that you already knew, or did you learn something new while you were writing it or when you were researching? How did it change you?
It did change me. And what was interesting is, so what the book is, it's a collection of over 25 stories from the Itihasas, our Puranas, Hindu history, about different inspirational couples. And when I wrote the book, I was familiar with many of these stories. But some of the things that were eye-opening for me, one is some of these stories appear, let's say in the Rig Veda or somewhere in the Vedas, and then they reappear in the Mahabharata or in the Puranas. And it was really interesting to see how the stories evolved or changed, or how they're the same, but the themes were the same. And then the other thing that I did is I grouped them into different themes. So one is, the beginning of love. So one is sometimes love is fleeting. One is on separation. One is on, rising through love rather than just falling in love. And what I really found is there is just a very, they come from very diverse sets of texts or traditions. Some come from folklore, some come from histories. I talk about Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his second wife, Vishnu Priya Devi. But there's just a very consistent ethos, worldview, framework of values and principles that come from this. And it's not judgmental, it's not moralistic, but it's based on a very nuanced, rich understanding of human psychology and accepting human psychology and our needs and desires, but then, spiritualizing it and making it something elevating and sublime. And very inspirational. So, reading about Satyabhama and Krishna and when she helps him destroy Narakasura and things like that. The stories actually, writing about them, even though I knew them, it just made me almost meditate upon them. And now they're kind of with me, and they inspire me. And so appreciating that there's so much relevance to us. So, for me, I learned, like I said, much more of the nuance of the dharmic vision and understanding of love and the associated emotions. I found the inspiration from it. And then, and that's why I think it's really, these stories are so relevant for us and still have that application for us. And I also felt kind of this regret almost. It's like growing up, the way I thought of love stories, and I've always been a romantic at heart, but it was always this very, popular culture, fairy tales, and you're gonna find someone, and this prince is gonna come and rescue you, and you're gonna find happiness, and all of these are very nonsensical notions. And we think we outgrow them, but we don't outgrow them because our popular culture is just full of them. And it's a very kind of narcissistic view where we use love as validation for self-esteem, or because we don't know how to make ourselves, I don't want to use the word happy, but make ourselves contented and fulfilled. We always looking outside. So that's why I think during the pandemic, you see a lot of people just unable to cope with being at home because they can't be self-sufficient. And so the importance of having these stories, which in the past we just got through osmosis, like our grandparents told us, or we saw it in popular depictions, and we just understood that. And now we don't have that. And without that, we're actually losing a lot, and we don't have that that orientation and that framework that actually helps us to live much healthier lives. So I think for me it was having a much deeper appreciation of the importance of these stories and the need to preserve and share these stories. And also I just think there's always this sense that Hindu women are so meek, and all these stories are about very passive women. And then you read it, and it's just not true. Like Savitri, she has so much wit and intelligence, and when she's she's having this discussion with Yamadeva about, bringing her husband back to life. Sometimes it gets depicted as, oh, she was like bartering with him, or she tricked him or something like that. But it's not that case. I mean, she's just lost her husband, whom she loved very much, but she still has a presence of mind to have this very intelligent discourse. She's not complaining. She actually never asks for her husband's life until the very end, when Yamadeva kind of offers it to her. But she's just discoursing on Dharma and the importance of satsanga, and her language and her expression are so beautiful that Yamadeva is just like charmed. And he wants to keep giving her these boons. And that's such a wonderful depiction. And I don't know why we can't even appreciate that. So every single woman in the stories has her own personality, is different, but it's very just strong in their own ways. So that was another thing.
Interesting, because I think, I mean, I'm in agreement with everything that you say, because, and adding on to what you just said, even in India today, our mothers came from a generation, or our grandmothers came from a generation where the idea of sacrifice was preeminent, where especially if it was a woman, the idea of sacrifice was, you sacrificed for your husband, you sacrificed for your family, for your parents, you sacrificed for your in-laws, your kids, especially your children. And that was something that was celebrated. But in my lifetime, I have seen how that whole thing has seen a reversal. Today, the idea of sacrifice, especially a woman sacrificing, why should you? So the whole thing is why? Why must a woman sacrifice? As if even if it were her choice, if, let's say today a woman chooses to sacrifice, and somehow she's lampooned for that very choice. So a sacrifice, and I don't mean sacrifice in a very, in its most cliched sense of the word, but I mean sacrifice in the idea of sacrifice, that I give myself up, or I put myself on hold or on the back burner for someone else. So that I think has changed and seen. I mean, today it's not a quality that is, applauded at all. So my question to you is, what do you think of this? And you've spoken about it a little bit, but in today's idea of love has changed quite a bit. The modern idea of love is not what it used to be, especially the Hindu love stories that you talk about in your book. There is a vast difference. So in today's environment, where everything is so focused on instant gratification and self-gratification, how do you explain to people concepts like Vipralamba Shingara, for example, that because love in people's mind is only about being together. If you can't, and in your case, I think it should resonate. So if you could speak a little bit about how do you explain something like that? How can there be joy in separation?
Yes. The fundamental problem is that we have this duality of you versus me, or me versus the world. And now what we describe as love has become about this bartering or this negotiation almost. So it's because if love is something I want from you, I have this desire and you're going to satisfy my desire for company or for, whatever it is, then there's always a sense, okay, I want something from you and you want something from me. So transactionally, that's why we're coming together. And yeah, as long as I'm getting that from you, then the relationship is good. But we know that all enjoyment ends, that desire will pass, something else will replace it. And then it becomes transactional, means it'll break. There's this misconception of sacrifice as something that we give up of ourselves, or it's a reduction of ourselves. I'm giving, I'm taking from me to give it to you, and so therefore I'm reduced. This is a very bizarre and wrong conception. So like in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 13th chapter, there's an entire passage of verses that talk about sacrifice. So the very foundation of Srishti, or creation, is based on sacrifice. The cycle of life is sustained through sacrifice. In that sense, you can understand sacrifice as being like, yagya and making the offerings into the sacrificial fire, where again, what you offer doesn't take away from you, because in nourishing the cycle of life, which includes all the sentient beings, all of the universe, then we ourselves are blessed also. It's not that I'm sacrificing for the devas. It's like I'm sacrificing because through that, the devas will be nourished and then the rains will come. And the whole thing is based on sacrifice. And in that, I'm also included. This notion has been completely taken away. Sacrifice in that sense isn't giving up as much as it is in an offering for the whole. And then when you're part of the whole, you are also blessed by that. And it actually, what you find again in these love stories, it's in the Western sense, when we think of love, we think, oh, if someone is loved, then they're great. Like if someone loves me, there must be something wonderful about me. In the dharmic framework, you focus on the one who is loving or the lover, right? So how much are you able to love? How much of yourself are you able to devote to someone else's well-being, not because of your own attachments or your addiction to them, but because of their own, that selfless sense. And that actually ennobles the lover. It's not about the beloved, it's actually a quality, it's an expression of the qualities and the values that you yourself have. So that's, the more you can spiritualize and heighten the love, the better that you are. It becomes like a sadhana in that respect. And so that idea of sacrifice, it's something that, if it's something like Parvachot, right? Yes, you are fasting because, for your husband's well-being and things like that. But that's not a taking away from yourself, because in doing that, that in and of itself is your own sadhana, it's your own spiritual path. And what our rishis and acharyas understood are that women are naturally invested in relationships. They're very, their identity is much more based on relationships, relatively speaking, than men, for example. So the more that you can spiritualize that, the more that you can make those relationships conducive to a woman's development and her path towards moksha, the better it is. So you start from that psychology, and then you're addressing that. And this has all been very misunderstood and made into this very zero-sum type of game. And the really bad thing is when you start thinking of like that, you're never going to want to do something to make someone else happy. And it's just this entitlement. So it's neither will it make you happy, nor will it make the other person. Yeah, exactly. Versus what can I do to make someone else happy? And and this isn't like a dharmic thing. Even like Western psychological studies find this, that when you're thinking of the team or when you're thinking of others, you actually feel much more fulfilled and contented than when you're only thinking of yourself. This is, research shows this. And then that goes to your point about separation. There is in the Bhakti tradition, there is a sense of this bhava of vipralamba or separation, or feeling love through separation. That is a very elevated, exalted rasa or bhava, which most of us don't have the adhikara to really necessarily practice that. Radharani has this, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had that, but we should know that it's there, and we should revere it. But what we can bring of that into our lives is understanding that love isn't about physical presence or company. But when you think of love as being part of sadhana, then you're able to practice that even in periods of separation, right? So and this kind of this idea of this bond, I think there's also something in modern relationships where there's just this fear. If I'm not with someone, they're going to forget about me, they may move on to someone else and things like that. And that's, again, when love is part of your duty or part of your dharma, and you can, it's considered a bad thing to be able to take someone for granted. Yeah. But actually, it's a very great thing if you're able to know that someone's always going to be there for you, or you're always going to be there for someone. There's no better, comfort or security in the world. And so that when you have that separation, even there, it's enough just to know that the other person exists, or that they care for you, or that, just knowing that person exists, like that's enough. And you don't have to measure it by, how much you're, how many times you call each other, or how many, because you just know. And that is something we can definitely apply to our lives practically. So that's something, that I've done in my own case. which is not to see, if you think of something that I'm entitled to this, and in the past 2 years, my husband should have been with me, or I should have been with him, and that's something that's been taken away from me, you'll always be miserable because there's always something more in life that you would have wanted.
I think if you limit yourself to always about your, this constant self-identification with every situation, it's always going to fall short of your expectations, I mean, I'm just adding to what we just said.
Yes, exactly. And so, if you're getting married, it depends, if your mindset when you're getting married is that this is going to be my partner in Dharma, and we are going to pursue our Purushartha together. And we don't know what'll come, or, what's our destiny. We didn't know in 2019 that this pandemic would be coming, but this is the person that I choose as my partner, and we're going to face life together. Then that's much, that's healthier, and that's, then you won't feel unfulfilled. Versus if you pursue love out of neediness and the sense that, I need someone, with me, or I'm loneliness, then there's always going to be this danger and this inability to really, you can't have a relationship with someone else until you have like a healthy, until you yourself are healthy. I think that's a fundamental point. But actually, there is one thing I wanted to bring up in that context. So there's one of the rites that happens in some weddings in different parts of India is called the Kashi Yatra, Prayoga. And basically it's before the wedding begins, and the groom is preparing to go on Kashi Yatra. So Kashi is, of course, like the sacred abode of Shiva. It's the most sacred city for Hindus. It's a center of learning. And then the bride's father comes to him and says, I know you're going on this yatra, but please consider, this woman, my daughter, to take her as your bride, to be your partner, and then may you pursue Purushartha together.
Kashi Yatra also symbolizes celibacy, that he is going to vow celibacy.
Yes. And so, the importance of the Grihastha Ashrama, or the family life. And then may you be partners together in pursuing Dharma. So there are different ways you can understand that. One is, I think nowadays we kind of think of it, it's almost like kind of like a joke, or like, oh, he's going, and the bride's family catches him and brings him back. But actually, it's not just like a play acting. It's not just like this merriment. It's actually much deeper than that, because at the time when you have the wedding, the samskaras are very strong from that. So when the rites are performed in accordance with the Shastra, it leaves a deep impress on both the minds of the bride and the groom, and for years and decades it'll carry them through. And what the Kashi Yatra reminds us is the ultimate aim is, in that sense, Kashi, or metaphorized by Kashi. It's just that you can go there, like through the Nivritti route, through the celibacy route, or you can go there through the Grihastha Ashrama. And that's what, it's not so much that you're abandoning Kashi Yatra, so now to become a householder and be in Grihastha Ashrama. It's that through Grihastha Ashrama, through this life, this family life together, we'll together proceed towards Kashi.
Yeah, you can still.
Yes. Right. And I think what's important is because then you always remember, even just subconsciously, the impress is there that yes, our ultimate goal, our ultimate destination is moksha, is the spiritual path. And then that really gives you the titiksha, or the forbearance, and the ability to get through kind of these hard times that come for every couple, because you know what the ultimate goal is.
And there's something beyond just domestic bliss. Right. So your book is a tremendous, I wasn't able to read the whole thing, but some of the stories I'm familiar with, some I'm not. And it's an impressive collection of stories that have been culled from different sources. So Itihasas, Puranas, and other textual sources. If you were to pick two stories that are your favorite for different reasons, what would they be? Just to give us a little, I don't want you to give too much away at this point. I would like people to read the book, but just one or two lines about two of your favorite couples, or two stories that touched your heart.
they all touch my heart in different ways. One that I really appreciated was the story of Savitri. So I'd known the story in broad contours before, but just reading it was a very moving experience. You'd spoken earlier about the choice and a woman's choice, and so in the story of Savitri, she's there's this king who's been childless for a long time. He does yagya to Savitri Devi, and asking for a son, and she blesses him with a daughter, and he's very happy to have this daughter, and she becomes Savitri, and she's so beautiful and so accomplished that no one dares to ask for her hand in marriage. So he actually asks her to go and choose a husband. She goes out there, she goes to the forest in different ashrams, and she chooses Satyavan. And then Narada Muni actually tells them that, well, he's going to die in 1 year. And her father says, oh, go find someone else. And again, just the importance of this, that it's not that she was, the affection and love the father has for her. And then she makes a choice that, no, he's the one I've chosen, I will marry him. And I think that element of choice is important, because if you live in a coercive situation, then sacrifice, it's not, if you're forced to sacrifice, it's not a sacrifice at all. So the agency and the choice and that freedom always has to be there. And then the story goes on. We've spoken a little bit about it, but what I really appreciated about that was this honor and respect that was there for Savitri. So when the final day of Satyavan's life, like all the rishis around them bless her that may she not become a widow, because they're so fond of her, so they're so affectionate toward her, and just this high regard that was held for her. And her presence of mind to speak to Yamadev, it's incredibly moving. And I think the story of Savitri is an iconic one for us as Hindus. Like we all have heard about it, but I think we've gotten so many distortions of it that we don't actually understand and appreciate it in the original spirit. So that was kind of just a revelation for me. And then I don't think I can, there's several stories about Radha and Krishna, and they're like my Ishta Devata, so that's always going to be, be my favorite.
Krishna behind me.
But I also really like the stories of Satyabhama and Krishna. So Satyabhama is a very spirited woman, a very fierce queen, and she's very the story that I chose come from the Harivamsha, like the southern recension of the Harivamsha, when she actually fights Narakasura herself, and then Krishna gives her this necklace, and it says that she'd wanted that necklace for a long time, and when they were together, she would always ask him for it, but he would never give it. But at that moment, he gives it to her. So just this kind of these glimpses of personality and this these relationships. I just really enjoy those.
I'm glad you mentioned Satyabhama and Savitri and Satyabhama, two very different characters, in their own way spirited, in their own way fairly individualistic. Satyabhama, in fact, like you mentioned, is only, in fact, she's depicted as a woman to whom Krishna often bows down to. In fact, he gives in to her, and she takes a lot of liberties with Krishna. So a very interesting choice there. So your how do you, okay, so now I'll come back to, as a lawyer and a writer, you have two very, very, very challenging careers. So you did speak about this a little bit in the beginning, but how do your practices, or what are your practices that help you keep you rooted, keep you sane, help you navigate these challenges? What kind of practices do you follow?
Yeah, so my day job as a lawyer keeps me like really busy during the week. So ideally, as a writer, you should be writing every day, but that doesn't always happen. I try to wake up early enough where I can do my sadhana and then have that time for writing, and then devote myself to my work day. It doesn't always happen, but I do try to think of whatever I'm writing about during the week. So it's really like the weekends, which is like my time for kind of creative leisure and writing and researching and reading. One thing I found is, so in some ways, like the the work that I do as a lawyer is different from the work as a writer. But I actually find them to be very synergistic. So as a lawyer, obviously you're thinking about like, technical things and structuring arguments and like analyzing something. But a lot of my job is communicating. So communicating to business people who may not be familiar with law. So a lot of it is the storytelling. And so the same things that come on how to tell a story, concisely and in a memorable way and things like that actually come through if I'm writing like an email or making a presentation or something like that. So that's interesting. And then on the other hand, storytelling, storytelling, we often think of writing as storytelling, but it's not. Writing is just, you have a sentence that you want to say, the apple was red, and you can say it in 10 different ways, and what's the best way of saying it. That's kind of the writing or part of it. But a lot of storytelling is just structure. So how do you structure something? What kind of situation, like you're almost making an argument. Even if you're making a story, there's like a thematic argument that you're making, right? So let's say you want your main character to learn X, or the main character has to go from A to B. Let's say he has to learn how to be, let's say he's afraid of snakes and he has to learn to overcome that fear. So as a writer, you have to figure out what situations will I place that character in where he has to face these fears. So what's, put him in a pit full of snakes, like, that kind of thing. So structuring that, there's almost like a logic to it. And there is a structural element to it where I actually find the work I do as a lawyer kind of helps me think that way in this analytical way. So it's interesting there. I think there are different parts of the brain. But then I find that rather than clashing, the two kind of like come together in interesting ways. Finding time can be a challenge, but I think if you're passionate about something, the time kind of the time manifests. So
right. Do you meditate on a regular basis, and what kind of meditative practices do you follow?
Yes, I do. Yes, I have. I do sadhana. Like, so the base for me and everything is sadhana. In the sense that if it was just me, like I don't think I could balance all of these things. But I have a puja room in my house, and I have instructions from my Diksha Guru on like mantra japa and other things and the puja that I do. And I do puja like so like worship of vigrahas and things like that. So I have vigrahas of Sri Radha Krishna that were given to me by my grandmother like many years ago. So that's been with me all along. And to me that's kind of the foundation of everything. So I know if I do my sadhana and if I sit for that, then I'll be in a place of harmony, or a place of where everything else can come from that. So without because writing itself is a sadhana, especially writing about Hinduism or Dharma. It has to come kind of from within.
Yes.
And so there has to be some kind of like an antakarna shuddhi, which it's not like I'm not saying I have antakarna shuddhi. It's always a continuum. But I know like the more that I devote myself to sadhana and antakarna shuddhi, then like the pure and the clear and the stronger the writing will be. And so for me, that's always the heart of everything, and everything else just be an outflowing of that. So again, it's just a continuum, and it's always like a moving target, but that's how I try to orient myself.
Yes. Your third book is slated for release sometime this year, and it's about Shiva and Sati. So, could you do you want to talk a little bit about that? And also, my add-on question is, what books do you have on your nightstand right now?
Sure. So this is a book. So when my husband and I got married, we got married in a place called Triyuginarayan. So it's
where is this?
It's a Triyuginarayan. So it's a small ancient temple a few hours away from Kedarnath. So in the Himalayas, and it's a few hours from Kedarnath, and it's the fire that burns there is the fire that was from Shiva and Parvati's marriage. So it's a very ancient temple, and
I've been to Kedarnath, but that was many years ago. Can you spell out the name for the benefit of our viewers? What place you're referring?
sure. So Triyugi Narayan, so Triyuga, and then Narayan.
Triyuga Nayan. Oh, Nayan. Naya. Nayan as in I.
Narayan, yes. Like Narayan has been there, is present there during the three yugas. That's where the name comes from.
Triyuga Narayan. Okay.
Yes, Narayan. Yes, sorry. I apologize for my pronunciation.
Triyuga Narayan as in Hari.
Yes.
Vishnu. Okay.
Yes. And so that's the site where it is said that Shiva and Parvati were married. And the fire is still there, like where the flame from their vivaha samskara. So it's an ancient temple. I'd been there before, and so we wanted to get married there. So we were able to do that, which was a wonderful experience, and that really inspired me. So when you're there, you feel the bhava of, Shiva and Sati, Shiva and Parvati, and just wanted to like pay tribute to that almost. So just retelling their love story, just out of just gratitude and inspiration. So before the wedding, I had done the Sombar Vrat, you do like a Vrat for Shiva and things. So it was just like a lot of, just feel the blessings of that. And I think even, through these 2 years of separation or however long that's going to last, it's really been the blessings from being in that temple and the blessings of Shiva and Shakti that have given us so much. So it was out of that, just wanted to write their story. And so that's where that book came.
Yes. Nice. And that is already done. It's going to be released. Are you planning on any further or writing your next book, or have you made plans on what you want to write next?
Yes, so I really like the format of the Hindu love stories book. So this is something where I didn't take any creative liberties, I would say. So in the sense, there was no fictionalization. It's just, these are the stories in the Puranas, and just putting them, just stylistically putting them in a just easy to understand and follow English kind of prose. And all the proceeds from that are going to Hindu charities, including this organization, Radha Seva, which supports widows in Vrindavan. And so I really like this format. So I want to do my next one. I want to do on Saptarishis for in time for Guru Purnima. So just taking the stories of the 7 great rishis and putting them, and again, using the proceeds for like a Pathshala or Gurukul or something like that. So this I kind of like to make a series in that sense. So different collections or thematic anthologies from our Puranas, from our Itihasa and things like that, to make it more accessible to a modern English reading audience. Then more on the fiction side, I do have a book on Kunti that I'm halfway finished writing, and another one on Indra, which I'm just starting.
Wow. Very interesting. Looking forward to all of these books, and I thank you so much, Aditi. I wish you all the very best. It's been such a lovely, engaging talk. And I do hope that you get to reunite with your husband soon enough. And thank you so much for your time. And once again, all the very best for the success of your new book, and the one that's slated to release very soon. I'm sure our viewers will agree with me that it was a very interesting talk, different from the things that we usually talk about here, but very pertinent nevertheless. I do hope that our viewers, especially the young ones, take away a sense of what it is to, what it means to love dharmically, or the many approaches that there are to love within the dharmic fold. And I hope that their Valentine's Day is the richer for it. So thank you, Aditi ji. Thank you so much, and all the very best to you.
Thank you so much, Pujita. I really enjoyed our conversation, and very much your thoughtful questions and comments. I really enjoyed our talk. Thank you for having me.
So please, viewers, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We're available on all social media platforms. Share, like, comment, and do come back once for more. Thank you and namaskar.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.